Hello, my name is Sachi Cunningham, and I am the director, producer, DP, and other various hats on the documentary CRUTCH.
Hey, I'm Chandler Evans, aka Via Bobo, and I'm the writer, director, producer on CRUTCH. And CRUTCH is about Bill Shannon, who's a performance artist, and he's a breakdancer, skateboarder on crutches.
You can talk to the camera if you need to. There's those emotional moments you need it.
That intro.
Sometimes you fall into it. I get it. As far as coming across this story, is there any connection to like Frontline, going all the way back, like hearing about this, or like
you really did your research?
Well, like I was curious where you guys connected with this story, because he's been around a very long time.
Yeah. Well, he's been around a few years longer than me, but I caught up with him in the first grade at Fulton Elementary School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He, at that point, had the leg brace that you see in the film, and he would stand at the top of the stairs during recess all alone, and we'd be playing below, and I would just be wondering what's up with that guy. I think I was also drawn to someone with a difference. I was certainly singled out at that time in Pittsburgh. I was the only Asian I knew. My mom and I were kind of the only Asians that I thought existed in Pittsburgh. So you know, I kind of stood out. Kids are mean, you know, I understood that. I wanted to meet, you know, someone with that kind of understanding of difference, but his was obviously on the outside much more prominently. And in high school, I happened to date his younger brother, and so got to know him a little better. And then in college, I fortunately met Chandler at a mixed race students group, and Chandler is half black, and I think, you know, that brought us to this story and desire to tell, you know, a story that is going to flip the script on disability, you know, and change the way people think about disability. But Chandler can fill in the other holes there of how we met and how the project started.
Because this seems like a project more than just a few years in the making. It's
20 exactly, to be exact.
That's not normal in the documentary world.
No.
That's got to be unique in itself.
Yeah, I mean, part of what's unique about this story was that it's not a retrospective of someone's life. It's not about an event that happened and then you sort of build to that event. You know, we intersected him when Sachi started. He had just started choreographing acts for Cirque du Soleil, and that's when she was like, "Oh, something's happening here." But it took us, you know, almost another 20 years to capture his evolution, and we had to live that in real time with him. So, and part of the reason for that was that from the very beginning, Bill was clear that he didn't want this to be another triumph over adversity narrative. Like, he was not into what the disability community calls inspiration porn. Like, he didn't want it to be like this freak show that makes good, you know, like he wasn't about the spectacle. And fortunately, he also had this, besides just the dancing and the skating, I wouldn't say just, I mean, that's amazing, but he also was a performance artist who was really experimenting with interactions, the phenomenology of interactions in public spaces. And as we lived with him and grew with him, his works became more interesting and like more complex, and eventually he achieved what he was trying to do. And so we were really lucky in that we got to capture that. So that's part of the reason it took so long. And then having to condense all those years of footage into, you know, 96 minutes was also a huge challenge as well.
That's my next question. How much footage? What type of footage? How did you get that to be one format? And as far as him not wanting it to be, like you said, that inspiration porn, how much did he have on any of the cut or stuff he didn't want in it?
Yeah. Okay, it's a big question. But in terms of formats, we were fortunate that Bill came with a bunch of, you know, photos that we use in the film and some films that he had made and videos that he had made himself. And then we went from high 8 to HD. I mean, I remember when like Netflix was only going to take something that was HD, you know, and we're like, oh no, some of our stuff is not HD, and that was
DV at that point.
yeah. And so yeah, that's right. I'm sorry, we went from high 8 to DV to HD, and you know, there's some 4K in there at the end. We finally got there, but I think we try to use that as our strength, you know. At certain points we thought it was going to be our weakness, but I hope that audiences enjoy that kind of journey through the world of filmmaking in terms of the styles. The second part of your question, I'm sorry, you're going to have to remind me.
Just the amount of footage and cutting that down.
Yeah, so like as Sachi said, we had it like so many different sources. We also, Bill and his friends had been shooting VHS way back in the day, so we had access to VHS. There was also stuff on 8mm. One of his friends, Griff Iffith, was an amazing cinematographer himself, and he shot stuff on Super 16. And
his
so
brother shot stuff on 8mm.
On 8mm, yeah. So like, I mean, we had all these things, and kudos to Premiere Pro. Like you can throw many formats onto a timeline, and then it will render that. So luckily, I mean, because back in the day you would have had to transcode all that, and the other part about is the editing process. Is that what you were asking?
Well,
how do we condense all of that into our story? Chandler's the writer, and I think writing is not always thought of in terms of documentaries, but I'm just going to pass it to you, is that, I mean, Chandler transcribed, meticulously ordered all of the words in all of the interviews, and figured out a search engine, and then
just thinking about how you did this had my mind going the entire time watching it.
We have a book that I did transcribe. Like, I took one summer and I went through, I think 3 keyboards because they would get stiff, and I would call Apple and scream at them, and they'd send me a new one. But this was back when I was working on Final Cut 7, and I used markers, and I transcribed the whole film with markers, and then I was able to find some guy online who wrote me an Apple script that allowed me to take the XLM from Final Cut and the markers and turn it into an Excel file that I could then export into Excel. So like, it was like this crazy thing, and me being on random forums, and this guy being like, you can't do that. And I was like, well, what if you did this? And he's like, I could maybe work on that. And he sent it me like 2 days later, and I was like, oh my God. So whoever that stranger was, he's amazing. I love him. Like, this is a long time. I know. Yeah, this is long. And then we worked with some amazing editors. Andy Gersh helped us get on our feet with a rough cut, and then Nick Bradford, who worked on Lady Gaga 5'2", and some other incredible docs. Like, he really got in there with us, and like, a lot of it was like how to condense information and time, because so much is happening and there's so much that you have to set up. That's why structurally it kind of is the way it is. Like, you kind of we tell the physical story and the story of like like his dancing and skating, so that you have the tools to understand what he's doing and how he's doing his performance art later. So like, first part is sort of the physical journey, and then the second part is more the psychological journey. But just to be able to take this scene, and like, we'd have multiple scenes, and I'd be like, let's see if we can just put them all together. So like, setting up a scene that was doing things on multiple levels all the time. Like, this may be about his art, but it's also talking about how he channeled his angers and frustrations with his family. You know, like, here's a scene about him, his rise as a b-boy, but also about how he wasn't cutting any slack in the b-boy circle. Like, you know, get rid of your crutches, bitch. Like, they weren't, you know, there was no sympathy in the cipher, as it says in the film. You know, so like, how could each scene basically do double duty so you can condense it all? And then ultimately, like, how can we get the audience to be the audience on the bus at the end of the movie with traffic, you know? So like, by the end, we want them to have all these same information, so when they see the things happen in the street, like, you know, we've been saving these things, they already understand, they get it. Like, they understand like where the schism is, where reality is different.
I'm remembering the end of your question, which was that, you know, did Bill what was his role, and did he object to anything? And it took us like at least 3 years to get him to sign an appearance release, maybe longer, because it's a lot to entrust someone with your story. We also were adamant about maintaining Final Cut, but he is, we wanted his meaningful input, obviously, and as a friend, I also didn't, I wanted to do good by his story, but I think he ultimately respected us as artists, and that's, that wasn't too hard for him to cede, but he certainly let us know if we weren't on the right track or were misunderstanding things he was doing. And one of the scenes that throughout the film that he was not crazy about was the camp footage.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was not... he was invited to that. It wasn't like his impetus. It wasn't him like seeking out this camp to perform. They had invited him to come, and he had never met anyone with Perthes up to that point. And so I think he also knew it would be emotional. For us, it was imperative because it was, we had been following. He was pretty adamant about not including his film or not getting too much behind the camera in terms of his personal life. So we weren't able to capture that much of him off stage or off, outside of his performative self. We had behind the scenes on those performances, but we were really needing some just candid moments that could illustrate, his kindness and his generosity and his humor and all of that, which I hope comes out in that footage. And, I think we were able to help him understand that that is something that the audience need and the film needed structurally also, to have those moments of reprieve to just, watch him humanize him.
What did you... He's obviously seen the film because he gave approval. I'm curious, what was his reaction to the film? And then did you alter the film after, or did it stay that final cut from what he got to see latest?
We didn't alter it for him. And one of his friends said, this is the most truthful lie I've ever seen, or something like that, where, Bill's been doing art for a long time, so we had to condense so much, and he still is like, oh well, we could have done this and we could do this, and his whole skating on crutches, he has a whole thing with step and roll. He's the only guy in the world who skates like that, and he has moves that he's named for that. So we could have spent a whole other chapter in the film just talking about that, and he's like, this should be a mini-series. We'd love for it to be a mini-series.
We would like to see that too.
But as Sachi said, the Camp Perthes stuff was probably the biggest piece of contention for us. The art stuff, he would come in and he was actually super helpful. He'd be like, oh, well, I have a photograph that might help this, or I have, check this footage out you've never seen. And we'd be like, oh my God, there's more footage. So he was actually really helpful and generous. Yeah, very generous with sharing all his materials with us. And the Camp Perthes was, as Sachi says, it really allowed us to show him his generosity of spirit, him playing with those kids. He's not guarded, he's genuine. He's like this, that's not an act of, that's how he really is. That's, and some of the other parts of the film, he is in performance mode. So he is he knows there's a camera, he's conscious of it. And in these other scenes, Camp Perthes, he's just being Bill. He's just teaching kids, he's being with kids, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I would also add that was the first time. He's always in performance mode, or often in performance mode, I would argue almost all the time, because he talks about always being looked at, because of his disability. So he's kind of always aware that people are looking. But here we have this environment where he was just one of the other 30 people with Perthes, he was no longer front and center, right? It was just like, okay, who are you? Now that we all know we have this, we don't have to explain ourselves to each other, who are you really, or tell us more.
What does it mean to bring the film to Bentonville, and the fact that Bentonville is a festival that not only highlights women in film, but diversity in film, and you guys have that both behind and in front of the camera? How important is it that it's at this festival?
Do you want to, since I spoke last? I mean, I could. Okay, I'm the woman. I'm the woman in film. So.
First diversity set.
No, I mean, it's all interrelated, and I would say on the disability tip is that I mentioned the race, component. Chandler and I are filmmakers of color. People who might see us and maybe need a little explanation on that, but I think that's part of why Bill let us do his story, is that we have this lived experience of understanding diversity in a very unique way, and people's rigid ways of thinking about race, and as far as disability, after I had graduated from college, I was hospitalized and it was actually during college, sorry. So during college, I was hospitalized with bipolar disorder, and Bill visited me in the hospital in Pittsburgh when I was there, and that's considered kind of an invisible disability, right? So I think that it gave me a much deeper understanding of disability and the misunderstanding around disability. It's very nice to be at this festival and have it front and center, and be able to, say all of that with pride, and be around other filmmakers that are also sharing, parallel but similar journeys.
We're hugely grateful to Bentonville for having us. One, this is our first festival live. This is the first time we've actually been able to sit in a theater and watch the film with people, and that was awesome. To hear laughter, to hear when people were engaged, maybe feel when people were pulling away, and to be able to interact with filmmakers and be able to watch other films. And in terms of their mission of diversity, I mean, underrepresented voices are so important, and they need to be heard because they broaden our world. It's how are we going to understand each other as human beings, humanity, if we don't hear stories from all different corners? And I think Bentonville championing that is essential.
Yeah. Can I add something? I hope that our film crosses over, it's not just people with physical disabilities that are attracted to it. I mean, the whole reason why diversity is important is it makes our world diverse, but it also helps everyone, right? So in the case of disability, for example, it wasn't until we can thank the use of wheelchairs for the, curbs on sidewalks, but moms with strollers are also this is great, and that wouldn't have come about without someone in the disability community demanding that, and fighting for that. So I hope that, I guess I would ask you, I hope that Bill talks about disability, but it's, someone who is pregnant and people can sit in the disabled, seat on the bus, I think can relate to it. Or someone, the woman who interviewed us for the online Q&A, she had a disability as a young child that she related, and she's a black woman, so she walks through the world in a way that is probably not so unlike the cartoon that we have in there of a day in the life of Bill, and just how many people are arriving at him and have this whole story that they are concocting in their head of who he is, but he's obviously much more than that, and all of us are. So I hope this is crossing over to a wide audience. Yeah.
The film says abandon assumptions. So.
Yeah. So how did it cross over for you? Or what did
it made me abandon assumptions because I didn't anticipate the film to be what it was. It's eye-opening. You guys didn't make a traditional documentary about someone, and I think Bill himself is so very much a unique figure because of that. So thank you guys. Thank you guys for making the film.
Thank you.
And bringing it out to the festival. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome.